What I'd like to do now is go over some of the components, the basic components that make up an argument piece. And we're going to be using the terminology that is used in the Common Core State Standards. I like to use these terms such as claim, reason, evidence, counterclaim, rebuttal. Those are sort of the most basic terms that are used to discuss argument writing. When you get into the upper grades, or when you do more serious argument writing, especially the kind of argument writing students have to do when they go to college, you'll run into some more complex terms. There are some terms that are often associated with what's called the Toulmin model of argument writing. And those terms include things like warrant and backing, qualifier, reservation. So if you hear those terms, there are other ways of talking about the components of argument writing, but they are a little more complex. The other thing that you'll run into when you do some more serious argument writing is forms of rhetoric. And so that's where you'll use terms such as logos and pathos and ethos. But we're right now, because our focus on basic opinion writing in the early grades and argument middle and high is to really focus on the more foundational components that make up an argument routine. So that's why we're going to stick with this terminology. Let me say a couple words about each one. What I have here on the chart paper is a series of very simple questions that if you have a poster like this up in your classroom, it in a very easy way kind of reminds students what the role of each one of these in an argument is. So if we begin with claim, the simple way to remind students is, what do I think? So the claim is your position. What position do you take about a particular topic? And we want to always make sure that when we write an argument, the very first thing that we do is make sure we state what our claim or our position is. And we want to use the term claim. The second is reason. And usually you have more than reason when you support a claim. So reason is kind of what's your main idea? What's a main point you can give to support your position, to support that claim? And in simple terms, it's why do I think it? So here's my position. What do I think? Why do I think it? And as I said, you can have more than one reason in an argument. The next one is evidence. And for this one, we ask the question, how do I know it? So evidence goes hand in hand with reason. Reason is sort of the broader, like a main idea that you give. The evidence is the details, the specifics, and they could be facts or statistics or quotes that you use to support the reason. So there's kind of like a chain here. The reason supports the claim. The evidence supports the reason. Now, up until 7th grade, kids really don't have to be thinking about the next two elements, and these are counterclaim and rebuttal. But as they move into the middle school grades, they now also start to think about the other side. So the counterclaim, and this is a simple question, is what is the other side? What's the other position? Or what's a point that someone on the other side might make? And one of the nice things about thinking about argument as a logical way of writing versus persuasion, which is much more emotional, is that it's okay to recognize that, yes, there's another side, and that you're trying to win the reader over with the logic of your reasons and evidence, but you acknowledge that there may be another opinion. The rebuttal then goes hand in hand with the counterclaim, because this is where you refute the counterclaim. So in simple terms, we say, what is my response to the other side? This is where you use a lot of logic, a lot of inference. Some of it is coming up with your own ideas, but you also can tap into using some evidence to support your rebuttal. So those are the 5 basic components of argument. What I want to do now is read you some examples. So we're going to walk through an elementary and a secondary. We kind of made these very simple examples so you could see how each one of these develops over time. So I'm going to begin with an elementary example. And here's the claim that I'm making. When the temperature is below 32 degrees, we should not have outdoor recess. Okay, now the opposite side is we should. So that's my claim. Now what I have to do is give at least one reason with evidence to support that. So here's a possible reason. When the temperature drops below 32, the playground becomes slippery and dangerous. So I've given a reason for why we shouldn't have outdoor recess, right? But I can't just state that reason. Now I've got to give you some evidence to back that up. So here's a possible piece of evidence. Last winter, a 5th grade teacher and a 6th grade student sustained injuries after falling on the ice. Now, the evidence that we give, it can be from other sources, but we can also use our own experience. In this case, the student is using his or her experience of watching, what happened to a teacher and a student. So that's my claim. I've given you a reason, backed it up with some evidence. Now, if I were to insert a counterclaim, here's an example. Students need to get outside to play at least once during the day. And that's a very reasonable counterclaim, right? So here's how I might refute that. Although indoor recess might not offer the opportunity to expend as much energy as outdoor recess, it still provides students with a well-deserved break. So that was a very simple example. Let's shift to another one. This might be a classic topic you might use with students in middle school, say. So here's my claim. Students should be blocked from social media sites at school. Okay? In fact, this is a controversy in many schools right now. So that's the claim. Here's a reason that I might give for it. It distracts them from academic work. So that's the reason why they shouldn't be able to access that. But now I've got to give some evidence. So in this case, my evidence is going to be anecdotal. So I might say, advisors in our school report having to prompt students to click out of these sites on a frequent basis. But I also could give a piece of evidence that's a little more formal. So I might say something like, in a study conducted by such and such, it showed that students paid less attention in class if their phones or their laptops were on. So you got my claim, you got my reason, you got my evidence. So let's think about a possible counterclaim. Well, students might say, learning how to refocus on work when you're distracted by social media is a real world skill that students need to have. Okay, that's a great, excellent point. So here's my possible rebuttal. That is true. However, we know from research that the frontal lobes of most teenagers' brains are not fully developed yet. And so making this point moot, because at this point, they're not able to learn that skill anyway. Okay? So you've just seen two examples of how each of the components come into play, how they support or refute one another. And this is the most basic set of points that kids need to understand about argument writing.